Brent Kochuba is an intentional investor out now on Epsilon Theory YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. We're talking dog breeder, the best in show stories of the mom who raised him. We're talking about these Credit Suisse, this Christmas party. He's got a legendary story about that. We even have a Madoff style scandal in the middle of his career, and all that up to building SpotGamma, what that means, the research giant that it is today. What a friggin' story. Jack Forehand, let's roll some clips.
We were very fortunate that we were on the NASDAQ in Times Square 2 weeks ago. Now it's our new product launch, and that was like really cool. And the reason I answered your question was because that was probably the first time that I got text messages from like my aunt, who I haven't talked to in 2 years. Congratulations, that's so neat. That was like the first moment where I think there was a lot of family and friends that were like, wow, like that was really like this pretty cool thing. And it was like a really cool experience for me too. But other than that, like I don't really talk about the business much. The Chinese debt issue happens in August 2015, and the fund that I'm running just blows up. Literally 3 weeks into the whole thing, found them through a recruiting firm and just got lucky, like right place, right time. They needed somebody young and cheap, and I think my starting pay was $30,000 or whatever, and I was doing network administration there, and that's how I got exposure to like trading and sitting on a trading desk and those kinds of things. And then about 6 months after I started that job, Bank of America bought that entity. And that got me into this thing called program trading. It was when Bank of America bought that entity, they asked if I wanted to start trading and working on the desk. I was like, yeah, this sounds great. And that was the start of that. I would chat on Twitter and stuff a little bit with people. And I had posted some of my internal models with gamma curves, and people are like, if you could give this to me every day, I would pay you. I bought that as a gag back in the GameStop days when everyone was like, hey, this is going to moon. And I put it up there, and it's a gold moon because that was the meme at the time. And it's just stayed up there ever since.
Welcome to The Intentional Investor with Matt Zeigler, where he and his guests explore the intersection of investing and life, portfolio and purpose. Nothing in this podcast is investment advice. Nothing in this podcast is advising you to buy or sell any security or to do anything with your money. Seriously, you should only act on investment advice from someone you know and who knows your unique situation. We are not that person. Matt Zeigler is a managing director at SunPoint Investments, and the opinions expressed on this show do not necessarily reflect the opinions of SunPoint Investments or of Second Foundation Partners. Securities discussed in the podcast may be holdings of SunPoint Investments.
You're watching The Intentional Investor right here on Epsilon Theory YouTube. I'm Matt Zeigler, and today we're diving into the backstory of a guest that genuinely, I have so many questions for how he ended up where he ended up. Now, when you think of famous BKs, you probably think of Burger King, the King, the Whopper, and this guest knows a thing or two about having it his way, and I think that's why he founded his own firm after all. You know, he wanted to be the king of something. Or you might be thinking about Brooklyn, you know, the B, the R, the O, the OK, the LYN, that's where I stay. And this guest knows all about flow. Most definitely, even if, I don't even know if you get that reference. If only Phil Pearlman laughs at this joke, I will be okay with it. But most definitely, he's all about the flow. So what other BK comes to mind? Clearly, Beyonce Knowles, and Daryl Fairweather will probably beat him in that category. But seriously, just like Beyonce is as everywhere as Burger King and as hyper specialized as Brooklyn 30 years ago, this guest is in the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg Markets, and checks notes, yes, excess returns on a regular basis, which I think gives him some type of like Grammy level status. He's professionally been as a banker, an American, a Swissy, and even a Wolverine schnickety-schnick before hedge fund floundering 7-0 and landing where he is now. SpotGamma, SpotGamma, at his shot, SpotGamma, and it's the only one and only Mr. Brent Kochuba. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I would say the only reason I agree to do this is to hear that little riff at the beginning. So we're well worth it.
Okay. As long as that's well worth it. We are starting with the hard-hitting questions. The moon over your head. What the hell is the story? Why is this picture here?
I bought that as kind of a gag back in the GameStop days when everyone was like, hey, this is going to moon. And I put it up there, and it's a gold moon because that was the meme at the time. And it's just kind of stayed up there ever since. I don't know if anyone's ever really noticed that it was the gold moon. Maybe they didn't, just didn't care. But that's kind of why that's there.
I didn't realize it was the actual gold moon, but now it's clear as day to me.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, maybe that's what it is. It's like one of those pictures, you look at it and you got to have the image jump out at you, and then you can't ever kind of unsee it. So, and I think if I go like this, I look like a god kind of. So
yeah, Yeah. I can
King-
see it. Right.
I was trying to think of a biblical BK. I couldn't come up with one.
That's okay. I'll revisit it. I'll plug it in later. You are the Madonna. You are the Madonna.
Madonna, right.
What about, where'd you buy it? Where'd you get that? Where does one acquire said
That
gold
was,
remove?
it's just a cheap online, nothing special. I think I had to actually nail the frame together myself, which tells you how cheap I went on that thing. But I don't know that I ever intended to leave it up for this long. It's just kind of hung up and then it was there. I think, I was hoping to buy like a Da Vinci or something one day that I would hang up there. And here I am.
Okay.
Kind of left it.
We'll revisit the home office art for a later day. But I've always wondered, I'm like, what the hell is this moon? And either I was going to find out you had some pretense interest in NASA or something.
No, just a cheap riff on
GameStop.
Yeah.
All right, good. Stonks for the long run it is. Tell me, where are you from originally? Where'd you grow up? Where in the country?
I was born in Minnesota, in Edina, Minnesota, and when I was about 8 years old, I moved to a town that is unfortunately well known called Newtown, Connecticut, and that's where I grew up. I actually went to Sandy Hook Elementary School as a little kid, and so that was kind of a weird time in my life, kind of come up in my 20s or whatever. Now I live about 10 miles from there. I moved to New York City for a while and just somehow made my way back here. And my wife is from California, and we met in New York City, and she said that over her dead body, would we ever move to Connecticut? And
Listen, there's no sure way to end up doing something than to utter the words over my dead body.
that's
right. Okay, wait. So first off, Edina, Minnesota. That's Edina.
Yeah.
Which I always assumed was Edina, and you already corrected me there. So.
Yeah, I call it Edina. It's kind of the, it's like the wealthy enclave of the city, I think. It's where the wealthy Minneapolis corporate.
It's like the Target guy and people like that. You're all in that area.
Yeah, it's nice and it's interesting because it's the center of so much happenings in the politics or whatever, but a lot goes on there, which is like it's really quite interesting because it's just this kind of Midwest city, and you wouldn't think that it would be this enclave for all these interesting things that happen, kind of like cultural pivot points or whatever. And the funny thing about it, my business partner, his name's Matt. We were best friends. We met in New York City. He moved to Switzerland. He's a portfolio manager of a biotech fund. And he stopped doing that and took a job with a genetics company based out of Edina, Minnesota. And so he lives now about 5 minutes from the house I grew up in, which is totally random and just very strange.
Totally random and very strange. Why were mom and dad there? Like, why did you start off there?
My parents were from the Northeast, and my dad got a job at a company called Honeywell. And he was an engineer there. And so that's how he ended up there. That job ended, and the random spot he got a job back was in Connecticut again. And I don't think they intended to necessarily come back to Connecticut, but that's where he found a job. And so, we moved back east. And that's kind of where my roots of my whole family is and everything anyway. So I think it was just an easy place to move back to.
Convenient to move back to. What about, did mom work or stay at home or?
Yeah, my mom actually is famous for showing dogs, not selling them.
Okay.
I grew up and she showed bull mastiffs, which are really big dogs, like kind of like Turner and Hooch, if you remember that movie.
Yeah.
She's had dogs in Westminster and the like, and then she got older. She pivoted to French bulldogs, which is like a crazy subculture, and I think it was last year she had the number 3 French bulldog in the country, which is pretty cool. So she's like kind of a savant in that space, which is just a real fascinating. Have you ever seen the movie Dog Show or Best in Show?
Best in Show.
It could not be more accurate. Like, she didn't think it was funny because it's sort of like my dad wouldn't watch The Office because, he's like looking out at the cubicles all day and was like, I can't watch this. It's just hits too close to home kind of thing. But yeah.
Did you grow up around, did you guys have dogs? Let's ask that first.
We always had like 3 or 4 dogs, bull mastiffs too. They were big.
Yeah.
So always a lot of dogs, and you never really got like an attachment to them because she'd show them, and she'd have puppies, and some would be be swapping dogs constantly all the time, and so I grew up a lot with that, and the inner workings of breeding dogs and all that stuff. Probably too young of an age, I was exposed to all that, and so that was it was interesting, and And I guess the thing that was fascinating to me about it was just like the subculture of the whole thing, and people just dedicate their lives, and you have handlers and pack your RVs and go to all these shows, and it's so political, it's just hard to believe. And then you just get like a whale would come in, like a rich person who doesn't care about losing money, but they would get the best handler or the best, blah 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 blah, and take the judges to dinner, and it would be like this whole, and it was just funny, and I guess thinking back on it now is probably kind of illuminating in some ways.
Did you, and I assume, especially with stuff like that, because those types of politics, when you're around that type of a setting, like you can't help it not be part of your dinner table conversation.
Yeah. I mean, all of my mom's friends were, in the dog show business, and, they would sit around at dinner and, can you believe that this dog won? It's because the handler is, cousins with the judge, and, just this whole thing. And it was kind of funny. And, you call a female dog a bitch, obviously. And so most of what I'd hear my mom is like, that bitch shouldn't have won the show. As kids, like, this is hilarious. And it still makes me laugh because I guess I'm kind of childish, but that was a lot of like the conversations, and that still kind of goes to this day, I guess. My daughter, I have a young daughter who's very interested in dogs, and maybe she wants to show. I think my mom hopes that she will. And all I hear is, well, the junior showmanship is very political. You got to be like careful. Like, I don't know how much we care about winning or losing this situation, but for some people, like anything else, it's everything. It's very important.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to get exposed to all those levels,
Mm-hmm.
and because like for me, casual observer, fan of Christopher Guest movies or whatever, it's like I know after the Thanksgiving parade ends, I see this thing, and I'm like, oh, that's funny. But that's where it stops for me. It's just this like thing. I don't think about the whole ecosystem and the dinner table conversations, and just like what you would have to learn to exist in a world that I know there's a lot of money moving in and out of that stuff.
Yeah. And there's all these disciplines where, you have to be kind of like an Olympic sport, like, you're like a professional curler or whatever. And like in your area, it's really cool, and you have like a lot of notoriety and stuff, but you never get rich on it. And so most of these people, 99% of them, have to have other jobs, and, they're just solely dedicated to this craft. And it's not cheap to own 5 or 6 dogs and bring them to the vets and, do all these different things. And, it's, you really have to love it and be very dedicated for, in your little subculture. Again, you get the reward and some notoriety, maybe, but there's not like a huge payday. It's like, oh, I'm going to be in the NFL. I'm the best. There's a payday at the end of this thing. And so the craft is kind of maybe worth it from that perspective. But, in this, I guess in a lot of other endeavors, it doesn't really work out like that. Like you really just have to do it for the love.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an investment. Now, what about you at a young age? Are you a sports kid? You chasing dogs around too? What's?
I was a sports kid. I mean, that's what I love. Like soccer and basketball were like my kind of big things, and played in high school and stuff like that. And I had little kids, and I try to get them to do sports now, and it's like you drag them kicking and screaming. And I was never that way. And my parents were happy to send me out because, like most boys, it's like, great, you want to go out there and run around until your head falls off, and good for us.
All the better.
And so, that was it. I grew up in a Newtown is a rural place, built up more now, but, I didn't really have you couldn't really see your neighbors or whatever. So you spend some time going, rolling around in the woods and things like that. And, a lot of like small town culture there, but, it was a good place to grow up. But yeah, it was like, play sports, play Nintendo. And that was kind of like probably 90% of my time.
Did you have, now you're forgiven because all young children are supposed to have the aspiration of, if you play sports, you think you're going to be a pro someday. How far along did you get with like soccer or basketball?
I played in high school, and that was kind of it. I went to University of Connecticut, and I think I could have made the JV team. And the reason I asked is because I lived on the same dorm room floor as the team manager, and he one time was like, "Hey, do you want to come down?" I think they were just like short people that come down and like try out to be on the practice team, which is basically like if you're in good cardiovascular shape and you're fairly sizable person. I'm not huge, but I'm 6'1". Can you just be the punching bag for like the players? And I didn't do it. I can't even tell you why I didn't. I was just like a lazy. I don't even know. I don't have a good reason. The thing, anyways, the reason I bring this up is because they all got championship rings. So like the first year in 1998 when I was at UConn, they won the first national championship. Everyone on the practice team got rings, and man, like talk about biggest regrets of my life was just like, why didn't I just go down? Even if I probably would have gotten rejected, I don't know. But man alive, that would have been cool to have that, championship ring. So
Seriously.
yeah. If time portal, I'd probably go back there first and try that out.
So sports doesn't survive into the college years with you. What about Nintendo? Did video games stay a habit, or did they?
No, I play. I mean, like in everyone else in like college, or you play, and then when you get older, it's like I can't handle. I would just waste too much time, so I just stay away from all that sort of stuff. And I can get pretty like. It's like an ADD thing, but you get like a tunnel vision where this is what I dive into. So I have to be careful to throttle that a little bit.
Throttle a little bit. What was the specialty or favorite for you? So if college is 98, you're firmly in Tecmo Super Bowl. Yeah, I mean,
I think like it was like the James Bond games came out.
GoldenEye. Yeah, you should have been.
Yeah, I remember that was like the big one. We would all like sit in the dorm and play that for a long time, and then
Absolutely.
I thought like Call of Duty maybe started around then a little bit. Like that was like the real transition period, I think, into like pretty neat and interesting games. And obviously like John Madden or whatever, you don't want to like play and that kind of stuff. But, the nice thing about that though is like you play Nintendo and then like it would just be done with the electronics. Whereas now it's like, I think if you play Nintendo for like 4 hours, then you just pick up your phone and then you're watching your phone like the rest of the day. And it's like, you never, like you have that energy, that grounding, like, opportunity. So
yeah,
it's a weird thing.
The grounding opportunity is a great way to put it. It's kind of like you could play Tecmo with your buddies all night, but then you're going to get up the next day and like run around outside all day.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Pick your head up, look around a little bit and see, what's happening out there. So it's pretty funny.
What was the thing with like, how'd you pick UConn? Was it just because you're in Newtown, you're in the state?
I mean, I was fortunate where my dad was basically like, if you go in state, I'll cover that. Anything out of state, then we got to talk. And, I came up from like a nice middle-class background. And so, I was a very comfortable child, but that was nice. And back then I think UConn was $8,000 a year, which is a lot more money back in the 90s, obviously, than it is maybe today. But that was a big driving force. And, to be quite frank, like I didn't have such good grades that it was like my choices are Harvard, Cornell or UConn. It was like, UConn was like probably the upper end of the schools that I could get into when I got in. So it was like, cool, no brainer. And, an hour from home, which was great. And, that was nice to be close to home, because I was a little bit of a mama's boy. So I like to stick around a little bit in that respect.
Well, you got to be the best in show in Newtown and in stores, right?
Yeah, that's true.
What do you take to in college? Like what starts to grab your interest? Where's your attention start to get focused?
It's funny because I went to school for a degree called Emerging Technologies, which I never, like, it was a weird discipline. And the reason I got into that was because it was some computer science courses. And then there was a lot of other things like, I think it was called Geospatial Information Systems, like mapping. I think I screwed up that acronym. GIS, remember it's called. And so you get like this multidisciplinary approach around technology. And then there was a bunch of business courses that were in there. So I didn't want to be like a full-on engineer. It was sort of like I wanted to learn, how to kind of like apply technology to business, basically. So almost like a management information systems. I think it was kind of a similar type degree. And I never heard of the degree up until recently. Then it started to pop up again. I heard it, come up in a few recent conversations. It was kind of funny. But the interesting thing back then was Facebook had just started, and it was like if someone gave you the invite, right, the Gmail invite or wherever, you get a Facebook, and that was like the cool thing.
And you needed .edu and
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right.
And so that had just started, and you could like order a few things online, but it was like really pretty limited. And what was fascinating about this to me looking back is through all of my computer courses and technology courses, no one ever was like, the internet is going to be this thing that runs our lives. You know what I mean? There was no forward-looking thought about that. And, looking back, you go, of course, with hindsight, you're like, man, I could have started all sorts of businesses, looking back with obviously Captain Hindsight here, you could have thought about, but there was no forward thinking in terms of what the impact of that was going to be. And I think that's so interesting now because as my kids are getting like older, they're still in elementary school, but they're like coming up now, and you think about AI and those implications, and you wonder like how prepared are schools for sort of like getting you ready to interact with that as a dominant force, right? And like, um, I don't know that society as a whole understands that, much less preparing like educationally for that. But that was like my big takeaway from school is like, okay, I learned to code, and I learned some of the basics there, electrical engineering kind of basics, and circuits and things like that. But you didn't really get that foresight of like, this is the way that you're going to apply this stuff in the future. And I think a lot about that now, just again with the AI stuff.
Do you think that's at all a function of just the turning point that was there being like that? The internet was still new. Social networking, very, very new.
Yeah.
Do you think some of that's a function of the time and just institutions are slow to turn?
I think from like knowing that the social networks would be like a big thing was not, I mean, I don't think any of us ever thought like, hey, everyone's gonna be dialed on their phone on Instagram, TikTok all day long. I mean, I don't think that, but like, as far as like, ordering everything from Amazon or like a single store, those kinds of things where it's like the first thing you're going to do is go to the internet for whatever information you want or to do anything or, buying anything, whatever it is, there was not even to me that sort of like that foresight didn't really seem to exist. It was like the internet was like, okay, it's cool to have a website that was kind of unique. And, that was really like about it. It wasn't this like, this is the way business is going to be done. And, that means all this different things for brick and mortar stores and, like how do you invest in businesses and, what kind of talent do you need to have and those types of things. I think that lack of foresight that's like my biggest takeaway from my time in college was like, cool, I got like the basic skills, but I don't think I came out of it thinking like I really know how to operate in the future. It was like, you kind of left on your own. And maybe that's changed in college now. I have no idea, but you go to, I talked to like I have a nephew who's in middle school and like, hey, do you use the AI? And like, no, you're not allowed to use that. And it's like, I don't know if that's right. Is it the right thing? I don't know. Doesn't feel right to me. It's not going away and you can like supercharge yourself. So it's like, yeah, it's a funny, dichotomy.
It's a weird thing to look back on. Now, what about, so you finished college, you get the degree in the emerging technologies?
Yeah, I got that. And then I went to work for I guess I call it a hedge fund. They're kind of like a hedge fund / broker dealer. And
how do you get this job? Is it like career fair, senior year? Is it a friend of a friend?
Yeah. So I was big into network security. I had a couple jobs at UConn doing network security, which was really funny because I can't remember the name of the software, but you used to be able to like serve MP3s and stuff like that from your own computer. Do you remember that
Like
software?
Napster, LimeWire?
Like Napster, yeah. So you could be the hub, and back then it's like we had not fiber, but we had Ethernet at the university, so you could serve up all sorts of videos and stuff like that. And so a lot of what I would have to do is find people who were like running these Napster things because that would open up basically like a back door into the university infrastructure for like viruses and all sorts of stuff. So I would have like scan the networks and I would always have to go into, people's dorm rooms or whatever had these vulnerabilities and like, okay, like I gotta like, patch all this stuff up and like fix it. And I'll never forget, it was like this one time I went to this professor's, office and, it's like, hey man, I see that there's these viruses or whatever. And so I have to like go into your computer and normally what would happen is you would find that somebody's computer was like being used as like the vault and they didn't really know it. It's just like they left themselves vulnerable and like, so someone's using their, computer as like the stash for all these MP3s and different things or whatever. So I found this big payload of just really inappropriate video content and, nothing like illegal or just like, run of the mill stuff. But I was like, oh my gosh, like I can't believe. And the professor was like, no, that's mine. And like, that wasn't like, it was this really awkward moment of silence. Cause normally people were like, how did that get there? And this guy was just sort of like, no, that's not mine. I was like, oh, so that's not the illegal stash. There was the illegal stash was over here. And that was really awkward, funny.
And you thought there were just weird people in dog shows. Public academia, watch out.
That's right. So anyways,
So network security is your
Network
thing. You're
yeah.
shutting down the Napster kids. You're the Napster cop, and now that's which
I'm
is
like the Napster
amazing.
cop / like learning how to, manage network infrastructure.
But managing a network is understanding, and I'm not deliberately trying to relate this to anything else, but like that's studying like flow, where stuff bottlenecks, and then what risks that opens up.
Yeah, it's true. And a lot of that was like mostly like a bandwidth problem. Like if you just had like a little virus on your computer, like I don't know, who really cares? But these are the people that would just be like crushing the bandwidth because they're unknowingly serving up, the entire world with, the latest whatever the 90s songs were. I don't even remember anymore. So you like clean that up or whatever. And so that got me a lot of like working experience. I did that for a couple of years. And so when I went to this broker dealer hedge fund, I found them through like a recruiting firm and, just got lucky, like right place, right time. They needed somebody young and cheap. And I think my starting pay was $30,000 or whatever. And I was doing network administration there. And that's how I got exposure to like trading and sitting on a trading desk and, and those kinds of things. And then about 6 months after I started that job, Bank of America bought that entity, like the broker dealer, mainly the broker dealer piece. And that got me into this thing called program trading, which was at the time was, if you have a pension fund, and the pension fund is, tracking the S&P. And so they need to buy all the individual stocks in the S&P. So they would send you like a basket of stocks they need to buy. Like, okay, we got 10 million of S&P to buy. And you'd have to like literally take an Excel sheet and load that into these servers and then like execute that in various different ways. And so it was when Bank of America bought that entity, they asked if I wanted to start, trading and working on the desk. So I was like, yeah, this sounds great. And that was the start of that.
Okay, what's the jump though between network admin and now do you want to be part of programmatic trading? There had to be a person, somebody.
Like the whole entity was being taken over, and so it was a small firm. There's 25 people maybe there, and they're like, we're going to need a junior trader on this desk because, it's all getting ramped up now. There's real money here. It's Bank of America, and there was an existing program trading desk. And so that was the opportunity, or they would, or I could go into like not a black hole of technology at Bank of America. I'm sure it's a pretty cool job, to have
I
here.
worked there. Black hole sounds like a description for multiple divisions. Death Star would have also accepted Death Star.
Yeah. So something like that. So, I'm 21 or 22 years old or whatever. And you just kind of sit there and go like, I went to school for this whole thing, but like, when are you ever going to have another kind of opportunity like that? And I didn't have a finance degree or anything. And it certainly wasn't, like the normal path to get into Bank of America is like went to Ivy League or, whatever it is. And you have a 4.0 and blah, blah, blah. Or you could just kind of get lucky and be the network admin at some small firm that gets taken over and they're like, here, start off, doing the junior trading thing. And, so once you have that opportunity, you're buying, you're going to do the lunch runs and doing all those kinds of things and writing tickets and, all those junior trader things. And then, inevitably, like after a year or two, you get a shot to like manage clients on your own and do some of the trading and things like that. And kind of that all is kind of like a prototypical Wall Street story,
Are you in New York at this time?
New York City. So I had to move from, I was in Norwalk, Connecticut at that little firm. And then, got shoved into New York City, however you want to put that, which is like a little bit of a cultural shock because, Newtown is in the woods and Storrs, Connecticut is pretty much in the woods. There's a much bigger community of people there. And so you're definitely exposed to more at the university, but it's all far cry from New York City. And, I grew up like the fanciest hotel I ever stayed at was like a Hilton, maybe, that kind of a thing. And, fancy dinner was like, the Pizza Palace. I could order whatever I wanted. That was like the fancy dinner, you know what I mean?
Okay.
And I'm not complaining. It was just like, that was my exposure. And then, you go to New York City and, you go to like your first client dinner and they're like, you can order as many steaks as you want at Capitol Grill. And you're like, this is crazy. I never understand this.
The Pizza Palace doesn't do this.
No, the Pizza Palace doesn't do this. And, so it's like, you're just like thrown into this whole thing and it feels weird because, you're with older guys who have had money for a while and, it's like, it's all the kind of, and this was like early 2000s. So like Wall Street still had that kind of like little bit of like I I'm trying to think what the right word. Like the compliance aspect hadn't come in and like dampened the excess, I guess is the way that I would put it. Like one of the guys that was at Bank of America still had made the news because of the whole little person bowling thing. Remember that whole charade, which was a funny thing because the little people, it was their business to set this whole thing up, and they got paid a lot of money for it. So like they wanted to do that, and I think they were happy about it. And I don't know. Not scared of it, but anyway, that was the kind of thing. Like all that stuff got shut down. It was like, it used to be like, fly your clients to Las Vegas and do whatever you want. And there's no cap on, like how much you want to spend. And then, that 2008 thing happens, and then that excess all just get reins in like in an instant. And then it's suddenly like, your cap is $100 per person at dinner. And then, if your client orders the expensive bottle of wine, like I got to pay for that out of pocket. And it was like this whole weird transition that happened. And, it was like it was a tumultuous start, I guess, from like 2003 to 4 to 2008, 9. It was a really crazy turn.
Yeah. And it's weird too, because you go from the college experience of the schools don't know how to think about what the internet means in the future in front of it into the work experience where they're like, we don't know how to think about how you advance up this ladder when you don't have Vegas dinners and fancy bottles of wine.
And the reason I'm laughing too is the banks don't know what the hell they're thinking about either with clearly 2008 show.
And then 2008. So that's their unfortunate professor with not Napster on his computer.
Yeah. That's just really like Countrywide and all that, Bear Stearns. So like clearly forecasting in general is just not it's just not a strength of most and entities.
Well, so what happens, like, how does Bank of America end? When do you transition into, was it Credit Suisse next or what comes?
Yeah, I went to Credit Suisse. So I was doing electronic trading, which is basket trading. You do some stock blocks. So that was all equity based. And they started to come up with, so like this was the birth of like the VWAP algorithm and transaction cost analysis and all that sort of stuff. And they started to talk about electronically routing options orders. And that just seemed like pretty interesting to me. And, like the writing was on the wall that trading was largely going more electronically focused. And so, I sort of was thinking like, what's the more interesting frontier? And because the electronic options trading was new, it was like, hey, you could go work in this little sector over here, but you're kind of like the senior guy because you're the only guy. You know what I mean? It's like this brand new thing. And instead of having to like work for another 10 years in this space that I'm not sure, what the growth opportunity is, because again, like people just started to put the orders in themselves as opposed to going through like the basket desk. And, so I went down to the floor of the exchange just to put this on. And there used to be specialists down there, they'd be talking and chatting, all that sort of stuff. And that was still like a thing when I started, and that was collapsing. You could see that like visually every time you go down there, it would just be like less and less and less people. So it was like, it's very obvious that trend was ending. So go to the electronic trading and options space, and that gave me, I got to sit on the derivatives desk there, and I worked under this guy, Dean Kernut, who runs a great podcast, Twitter channel, Alpha Exchange, super knowledgeable, awesome guy. And, I learned a lot from him just the way that he operated things. And then he used to give this training to the new sales traders in the derivative space about, pricing options and all those kinds of things. And I still have like all the paths from that, but that was like my exposure to derivatives pricing. And then, learning how these orders are getting routed and that kind of thing. And then one day I got a call from a headhunter because Credit Suisse, which had a really big electronic trading outfit called AES, Advanced Execution Services. They're like number one on the street in the electronic trading space, and they wanted to get into options. And so it was kind of like jumping from not the small time at Bank of America in that space, but it was certainly like the D League, NBA, development league to like, oh, Credit Suisse is like the premier electronic trading outfit. And, you get like a nice salary bump and things like that. And obviously you usually get like a title increase a little bit there. So, that's why I went to Credit Suisse, which was cool working for the Swiss bank and, just a little bit of a different experience and change of scenery there. And
what
then
years are you there?
I was there 2007 and 2008, I think it was.
Okay. So right into the teeth of the crisis now.
Right into the teeth of the crisis. And what jaded me about that is that, I was like still a junior guy and I wasn't making, relative to a lot of other people on the desk or whatever, a lot of money. And at the end of the year for the bonuses, they gave us some of the bad debt that they had at the bank. And so they're like, instead of paying you like in cash, and I don't want to have gotten like a $50,000 bonus or something. I was lucky that year. They're like, we're going to give you this toxic debt that we have to get off our balance sheet, basically.
Have
And
some convertible preferred, sir.
and
Really?
if you held it for 20 years, actually, turns out it would have been all right. Maybe 15 years. I don't know. I don't know what happened to that stuff after UBS fiasco or whatever. But, like it left this kind of bad taste in my mouth because they also canceled the Christmas party. And instead of having the Christmas party, they had a charitable auction, which first I say bad taste in my mouth because of charitable auction makes you sound like an asshole. But when you go to the auction, what you're doing is you're bidding on like a 3-day weekend at like the senior MD's house in Martha's Vineyard. And so like it's really nice he's opening his house up for like the weekend but like I just got paid in bad debt and I'm 27 years old. Like I was not the guy that got like the guaranteed 7-figure contract every year or whatever. And it's like, you shouldn't cry for me. But at the same time, like this all just feels like not great. Like, I don't know. It just feels awkward. And, I didn't feel comfortable about that path or whatever. And at that time, market makers were just killing it in the option space, because of all that volatility, kind of like now, I think. They could widen the spread out as wide as they want. It's record volumes. It's like, people are paying whatever spread to trade as much as they can. And so like, I saw like this, Wolverine was like, oh, these guys are doing really well and they're expanding their business. And, I was like, I got the opportunity to like work directly for partners there, which I really like because Credit Suisse had, some challenging politics. And that's where I really started to see you have to like, choose your horse when you work for a bank and hope that horse, is the fastest horse, because even if you do a good job, but you sidle up to the wrong guy and that guy gets fired, well, you're probably getting fired. It was like this crazy, it's this really crazy thing. And I've just never done well in that type of environment. So, working for the smaller firm and getting that extra exposure, I thought was just a great opportunity. So that's how I ended up at Wolverine. And I was a broker there and, something with electronic trading platform and got exposure to how market making operations work. I was never a market maker, myself, but I started to get like the full 360-degree view because, I had clients and they were structuring trades and, I'd done a lot of block trading and things like that in the equity space. I saw how the exchanges were working. We were working on the algos a lot with the options routing. So it's like, how are these orders placing at the exchange? How do you want to change this order routing behavior? All this sort of minutia that you probably don't think about much nowadays. But I kind of got like that real 360 view of the U.S. listed options space with that kind of experience over, I guess it was about 10 to 15 years. So,
and you came in, I think this is worth just like you acknowledging or walking us through in some way, like you came in a transition period for that market because we were moving increasingly to electronic. The entire dynamic and setup of that exchange was basically, it was altering from the way it used to be when you came into it.
Yeah, it was. And at the time, if you want to trade an option, generally you had to pick up the phone and call somebody at a desk. And the going commission rate back then was a nickel per contract. And so when we first launched this router, my whole job was like telling people like, yeah, you can now sweep all of the exchanges with this electronic box, right? And you can put your order into Bloomberg and route the order down. And we get paid a nickel for that, which is crazy. Because when you do kind of the multiplier, like that's a massive commission. Now I think you probably get like a quarter penny if I had to guess, in terms of like what kind of commission rate you would get on that sort of thing. So like my first year in the electronic trading space was like one of my best commission years because people are so excited to do this like electronically route on their own, and they still paid the current options commission rate that, it was like, it was wonderful because, it was a lot of flow and it was like a super high rate. And, so that was like really fun. It was like, you just kind of like bring people in because it was so brand new and they're all so excited to do it. There was no competition and the commission rate was really high. And then, like anything else, like it gets commoditized super fast and the rate comes down and, things kind of get mature. Right. And, so I have no idea what the commission rates are in that space now, but, probably not that great. And I think a lot of the money that was coming into is based on, it's called payment for order flow, which is this weird thing where the market makers now pay you to have the order flow directed essentially to them on the exchanges. And so, that always felt like a little unstable to me in the end times of when I decided to move on.
It's interesting again, because then even like at Wolverine, this is the first time you go in the other direction of like new to maturing over that 10-ish plus year period, as opposed to like coming in maturing and just only seeing the post commodification decay of the spot you're in.
It's kind of true. I'm not a super patient person. Like my attention really like jumps around a bit or whatever. And I think when you're like sit here and do the same thing every day for, like year after year, I'm just like not good at that. And then up, on top of that, like the politics or whatever. But I learned a ton from being at Wolverine, and it was the first time also that I worked with or for a partner, like the guys that own the firm. And, that was really a fascinating thing to watch how they operated and just kind of, the things that they were thinking about. And, they would make investments in new, like divisions at the firm and different, those kinds of things. And, they all still had like this core love of trading, which, is one of the things like, I got as soon as I started at that first job. And like, you just love that. And like, you don't ever want to like move away from trading, even though your role may change or whatever. It's just like this fascination with markets that I think is, there's a lot of people that have that, and it's like, I got to be near that, I can do a bunch of things, but as long as I can reach out and touch that, aspect of it, then I'm kind of good.
Right. Still have that pulse. Yeah. Arm's length. How does Wolverine come to its close? Is it the next opportunity that appears and takes you out the door, or?
I had this is like a crazy story. So I don't know if I really fully told the story, but I had a client who he worked for I'm maybe sort of vague, like just you don't understand what. He worked for a very big pod shop, and he had been a client of mine for a long time, excellent client of mine, and he worked for a big pod shop, and he's like, hey, I want to start my own fund. He's like, I really need somebody just like you who can like get the systems going, can do the trading for me, like just kind of be like the all hands on deck for, like, or the jack of all trades, I should say. And, so we like get this thing going. I'm like, this sounds really cool. Like I was still young. I had not quite had my first kid was like about to, come due.
You're already married at this point?
I was 30, about 35, 33, 34, somewhere in there. Yeah. Because this is about 2015.
Yeah.
Well, I know it was 2015, and I can tell you why in a second. Anyways, so he has a family office that's going to fund him, and I'm like, this sounds great. Like I've known this guy for forever. He works at this reputable pod shop. Like I met everything, and it was like, this is a cool opportunity for me to kind of like jump to the buy side. And like the buy side always has like this allure to it when you're on the sell side, and like mainly because you're always maybe bowing down to try to get those commissions or get the flow, those kinds of things. You're like, all right, I'm gonna jump over that side and learn like the actual modeling and trading and those kinds of things. And so I made that jump, and I started trading from home, and getting the systems up and all that. And I was like, that part was kind of easy, and I'm placing all these orders. And the strategy was a kind of like volatility. I would call it volatility arbitrage, but at the end of the day, it was selling S&P puts and waiting for those to kind of decay, and then you'd like kind of cover them for just like a simplification purpose. And so I was doing that for about 2 weeks. We had just started trading. We had a small account that we were running just until like basically the bigger infrastructure got set up. Long story short, so the Chinese debt issue happens in August 2015, and the fund that I'm running just blows up. Literally 3 weeks into the whole thing, and you see the options that were short, they get marked 2-3x against us, and the options that were long, which were longer dated puts, deep out of the money puts, they didn't budge, so they offered no hedge, and so we're trying to get our way out of this. And the crazy thing is, like, we actually figured out how to like stay alive, and we were like, look, if we hang on like another 2 weeks and vol just settles down a little bit, like then actually we should we should be great. Like, cause we had been up on the year the PM at the time had been up on the year. So, it was like, it wasn't a huge drawdown, but it was a drawdown in terms of like the week over week, but on the year it was still like, okay, like we're only down a little bit here. And the bank that we were priming with was like, just did not want these strategies. And that was really an interesting moment to me. Cause like, it didn't matter how we were going to cover it. It didn't matter what we were going to do. There was no answer we could give them to making this portfolio okay to carry. They were just like, we are done. You're out. You're done. And that locks in all of your losses, right? They need to clear their books. So that was illuminating to me that that's really how that worked. Like, it wasn't just about your risk profile in terms of the P&L you thought you could make. The bank has its own risk profile, and there's clearly like, these like strategies that they're like, hey, no, thank you. Close it up and kind of hit the road. So that thing blows up, and so the family office I'm working for is like suddenly very unsure about continuing to fund this operation. And long story short, the portfolio manager that I was working for, I get a call from a regulator one day, and they're basically like, hey, we got a call about this PM, and someone's saying like they're missing money that they invested with this guy. And so it turns out that kind of like a mini Madoff thing occurred, where the portfolio manager had lost money in a previous venture, whatever it was, 10 or 15 years ago, 20 years ago or whatever. And he always been able to pay off like an investor in that with his own money that he had made from a salary. So like, once he stopped getting paid from working for somebody, he could no longer pay people out, just exactly like Madoff. And so he ended up getting in a whole lot of trouble for that. And the family office was like, look, Brent, do you think you could fix this strategy? And I was like, I think I can. I know what happened with it. And so we're running the strategy. I run my augmented strategy, and it's doing fine. It's doing all right. And February 2018 happens. And I had built the portfolio to be like to do very well if vol just jumped, right? It's like, I was net long all these out of the money puts. And if I was like, look, if vol spikes here, if it ever happens, like I'm going to be hedged, and that's going to actually be this really big payday, kind of like a tail risk strategy. So 2008 happens, February 2018. I'm like, oh, it works great. Like we make this money. It's great. And I'm thinking I'm like king of the world, walking around like I've figured this all out. And then, the whole vol surface after that event just shifted. And so the strategy I was running just didn't ever really act the same way. Now in hindsight, I look back and be like, well, no shit. Like, of course it's like changes, but at the time I was like sitting there by myself, and like, I just didn't adjust things the right way. So I just basically like bled out, over kind of the next year, and just didn't, I couldn't ever kind of articulate things the right way. And then you basically play this forward into COVID, and COVID hits, and the family office mainly runs real estate and a lot of golf courses, things like that. And they're like, we're like, anything non-essential is done. So over that period of running that strategy, I had built all of these models, like dealer gamma models. Like I was only trading S&P index options through that entire period, both with that portfolio manager and by myself. And so it was like, I saw day in and day out exactly how this moved, big pockets of open interest, we control things, all these kinds of things. And there was these papers that started to come out there was a Deutsche Bank guy in about 2000, I think it was 16. And then Charlie McGilligan and Amura started to publish these gamma models or whatever. And he started to like put all these different things together. And so I had built these gamma models. I'm like, wow, this is really something. And, like that was like my last model that I was going to kind of present or whatever. And then this COVID thing hits, and I'm like, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do, because how do you interview for a job or look for a job when everyone's like wiping their groceries down in their, their driveway? Like, it's like this, like what is happening here? Like global pandemic. So, you just sort of sit there and you go, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do. And I would chat on Twitter and stuff a little bit with people. And I had posted some of my internal models with gamma curves, and people are like, if you could give this to me every day, I would pay you. And I was like, all right, I'll try it out, whatever. And post a couple gamma models, and that was the start of SpotGamma.
When back in New York City, I'm assuming. When do you meet your wife?
Mm-hmm.
When's she come into the picture?
How does this go? I just started my job at Credit Suisse, so I was like 27ish, something like that. So it's like right around 2017, and she's in the arts. She went to school for musical theater, and trying to get on Broadway and that kind of whole thing. So like total different perspective on things, and really quite a bit different. And she's always been comfortable with uncertainty in a way that I wasn't. Like my dad was always sort of like very, was worried about financial scarcity, right? Like prepping, not like a bunker kind of guy, but just, frugal and conservative, you know what I mean? And hey, you got a good job, like just ride that kind of thing. And so like, okay, if you're jumping from one corporation to the other, there's not a lot of risk in that, right? Especially back then, you used to get a guarantee for at least a year, and it's like, okay, that's all safe. When you go to like jump to the hedge fund space, you're taking on a lot of risk, and that, you know, that's not always easy, because you're like, I could just sit in this chair at Wolverine or whatever and do like a decent job and probably work here for another 20, 30 years, right? Like they're pretty good to their people there, and it's like there's no real politics there. And so if you're doing a decent job, like you'll continue to get paid fine, and that's great. Like why mess with anything, And so, she was always sort of like push the boundaries a little bit, and was just very uncomfortable with being uncomfortable, I suppose, is the way to think about it. So I credit her, for better or worse, to saying like, it's okay to take this chance. Cause I think there's other people who have spouses that be like, you're being stupid. Like, don't do this.
Which is part of why I asked, because it's, curious as that progression goes through, how much is Brent's a knucklehead, which I'm not getting the sense of.
Yeah.
And also how much, because those are mutual decisions, because those are also the things that can like kill a relationship if you're not.
Yeah. And she, around that same time, one of the things that she does, she started her own business, and she's like in the coaching business, kind of like, like you hear the word like life coach now, and you think like it's a common term, right? But like back in 2017, 18, it was like, people didn't know about that. It was like this weird kind of, genre of things.
It's a niche industry.
Niche industry. Yeah. And so, she had started this business, and it was right place, right time for that business, where, she was working with people, particularly women, and she'd found her niche, and like that was going really well. So we felt comfortable because her business started doing pretty well, that I could take a little bit of a risk that time. So it was like kind of like passing the revenue earning baton, and, I was still getting paid working for the hedge fund and stuff like that. So it was like, not like I was starting from zero and trying to build like a, a storefront down the road or whatever. It was like, kind of calculated risk, I guess. But yeah, it was like, because she was there to really like be supportive of that, took that opportunity. So
yeah. And what happened with, because COVID and there's the timing of this stuff and the beginning of SpotGamma and all this, like that's a lot going on at once. Those in and of themselves had to be some hard conversations and decisions. And were you one kid along at that point?
we were two kids along at that point. The other one was just 2-3 months old, like true COVID baby. And, I don't know that like I was particularly scared about, I mean, I literally like the hedge fund or the family office is like, you're done. And then it's like a week later, I post the models up, and, people start paying for them. It's like a little thing. I remember the big thing was like, I got enough subscribers to the site, and I was just emailing out a newsletter on a daily basis. And it was like, I covered my car payment, and I was like, oh, this is pretty cool, and we're talking about like these different gamma flows and stuff. And then the Market Huddle podcast, and back then, gotta remember, podcasts weren't all that popular. I mean, they were more popular, they weren't zero.
Let's face it, Kevin Weir is a popular guy.
Yeah.
He's been on this podcast.
Yeah.
He's a popular guy.
And Patrick Serezna, like, I mean, I owe them, I've never seen them in person, but I owe them, I owe them something. And so, there's only a few podcasts out there, right? Like now there's many. And, but back then they were, like kind of the only markets podcast. Like they had a lot of foresight. And so I do a whole breakdown of like what gamma curves are and all this whole, breakdown. And that like totally launched the business. Like suddenly we had all sorts of like people were, coming in and subscribing and stuff like that. I'm like, oh gosh, this is actually going to be like a legitimate thing. And that was mid-January of 2020. And so that happens, and you get all of this like attention, and suddenly like, oh, okay, I can definitely make this work. Like the subscribers are coming in. So I never had knock on wood, this moment of like real despair. Like number one, because my business was still doing okay, so it's like I was never like out on the street or anything like that. But the things just transitioned so fast. It was like we never had a moment of sitting there thinking like, what am I going to do? And I also think at that moment you're just like so focused on like what's going on in the world. Like you're worried about my job, but like literally, it's like the stupid things you're doing. Like I remember going to the grocery store and then in my driveway, I'm like sitting there, like wiping off the food with like, I don't know, like, I think it was like Windex. It wasn't even real. It sounds so stupid. And, but like everybody was doing that. Like I was not the only idiot in my driveway disinfecting my cereal box. Um, so I think like that was just this distraction. You're like, I don't know, like we couldn't see my parents. Like you can't drive and see them, especially because they're a little older. Like you don't want to go down there. And it was like all that stuff was going on. You forget about how crazy that was, that it was like this weird distraction. And then like by the time you turn around, it's like, oh, this thing is going, and I'm working from home doing that. So, it's great. And then you fast forward to February OPEX of that year, 2020, and the market kept going up, and people in China were like dropping dead. You remember that whole thing? Everyone's like, this is not like, something is not right here. This is not looking right. What's going on? What's going on? And then like the day after OPEX in February, whether or not you want to say it had anything to do with OPEX or not, it doesn't really matter. The timing was like perfect, and the market just drops like a rock right to March OPEX. And then suddenly everyone's like, options gamma, is like, this is an important thing. And I'm like, there's like one other person around who offers similar things, but no one's writing like daily commentary on this stuff and daily models on this sort of stuff. And so, I just very lucky, right place, right time in that respect, that, like people's focus on the options market, just really ramps up. And then all of a sudden in the summer of that year is like Tesla options were doing these crazy things, and people were like, oh, what's going on with that? So you're tracking that. And then GameStop happens in 2021. And it's just like, okay, options gamma is like, everybody knows that's a thing. A gamma squeeze is, of course, that's a real thing. And, so it's like all that just ramps up so fast. And it's like, it's a very crazy experience. And I feel like a lot of gratitude that, it was a rising tide, certainly for me, in that respect.
Yeah. Another thing where you experience like maybe not full maturation of the idea at this point, but you caught the right part of the curve for people's interest in this stuff.
Yeah. And, options volume is up 300% from COVID. And I think probably even higher now if you look at the volumes over the last month, and zero DTs and all these things. It was like, it just keeps kind of like, growing, and the attention kind of keeps, gaining there. And, it's kind of like, as you mentioned, like, is this a mature thing? And, can you continue to innovate? And I think we still can. So like, it all kind of, goes okay. But, like everything else now, there's, I don't know how many, every day there's like some new gamma service that pops up, and like, you're a little late to the game, I think, if you're trying to do gamma by, strike analysis at this point, or launch that as your business or whatever. But, yeah, certainly beneficiary of the growth of the options space. And, you always want to take credit for the tactical moves you made through your career and getting into that space. And then there's, it's impossible to just take away the fact that, like, hey, there's a lot of luck involved with the fact that, the space has grown so much, and the stimmy checks go out, and it's Roaring Kitty shows up, and, then everybody is, knows about gamma squeezes, and the SEC wants to talk about it, and all these kinds of things. And you're like, you need that element of luck, and you have to be, I think, positioned to take advantage of it, and hopefully you can take advantage of it. But, it's also fortunate that this discipline and my interest is in finance, which can generate a lot of revenue. Like, my mom could pick a winning, bull mastiff, the number one bull mastiff in the country, but no one really, like, you're not gonna make any money from that.
Yeah. You don't need Frenchies when you have gamma squeezes.
That's kind of right. Yeah.
Does anybody in the family, like, let's be frank about something. Like, you're a grown man talking about GameStop and Roaring Kitty,
Yeah.
like all this stuff. And sometimes I think if it's not for our friends on the internet, we're just really friggin' weirdos in the world with this stuff.
True.
Who does anybody in the family like fully appreciate SpotGamma, what you've built, what you've got going on there? Or they just know Brent's got a cool thing in his little office with the funny looking moon?
I think recently it has like changed a little bit in that respect. And I So I paused because I don't, I always feel weird like talking about myself a little bit in these things. So like I have like a personal coach tell me like you got to celebrate things sometimes. So like we were very fortunate that we were on the NASDAQ in Times Square 2 weeks ago. We announced our new product launch, and that was like really cool. And the reason I answered your question was because like that was probably the first time that I got like text messages from like my aunt who I haven't talked to in like 1 or 2 years, just like, congratulations, that's so neat, like blah, blah, blah. And so that was like the first moment where I think like there was a lot of family and friends that were like, wow, like that was really like this pretty cool thing. And it was like a really cool experience for me too. But, other than that, like I don't really talk about, the business much. It's also like this weird derivatives discipline. And so, if you go to a cocktail party and you're like, I'm in stocks, 99% of the time, the response you're going to get from that is someone being like, I just bought Apple last week because I think it's like, I was looking at my phone when I was using the bathroom or whatever. And that's what I determined was the best. It's like, I hate those conversations. So like, I just kind of tell people I do like derivatives research, and people just go, oh, whatever. And just like walk away,
Yeah, that feels boring. Let's get away from this.
Yeah. It's such a weird thing. I can't think of any other discipline where you're like, I do stock market research and then someone proceeds to tell you what stocks they bought or whatever, instead of like asking the question, like I'm not going to pretend I sit here and run a, the number one hedge fund in the world and could give you all sort of advice. But as an outsider, like I can't imagine like, hey, Matt, you're a professional musician, right? And then be like, yeah, I listened to Metallica yesterday on the radio. And you'd be like,
this, I think, is the same thing though as the people who are like you're a skin doctor or something. You're a podiatrist.
Yeah, check this out.
Like you never want. Yeah, I can't. You don't want to be that guy at the party. As soon as you admit that, you're inviting weird.
Yeah,
it's all your off clock weird is getting invited into your life.
Right.
Yeah, it's a very real thing. But the Times Square stuff was amazing. If I can get Jack to splice that into the video where we showed it a minute ago, because that's just. I don't know. I don't even know if it signifies anything, but it signifies to other people that something you're doing warranted being on that billboard in that place and time. And that's really cool.
Yeah. And, like the NASDAQ is a large corporation. And so, like a lot of times like, oh, I thought he's just kind of like typing stuff in his basement or whatever. And, it's a cool, like little thing. And then you kind of like see that and everyone knows the NASDAQ, even if you have nothing to do with stocks, everybody knows like Times Square and whatever. So that was like it was a pretty cool experience. Like I went in for the ringing bell and there's like it was this Chinese firm, that was like AI HR software. So I was like standing in this room to ring the NASDAQ bell with like literally like 100 Mandarin speaking. I think they were Mandarin speaking. And they're ringing this bell and they go outside and they put their firm name up on the billboard, and like, all these guys just made a lot of money with the IPO and they're celebrating their champagne and all stuff. And then they move all those people out and then they walk me over like in this empty space. Like, here's a billboard and it's up there for like 8 minutes or whatever. I'm like, this is crazy. And like, no one in Times Square cares. Like just me and, my wife and kids are staring at it and it's pretty neat. It was like, it was a kind of a surreal, like you get a lot of imposter syndrome, I think, in a weird way. Like I was like, is this cool? I don't know if this is cool. And then they make a big deal out of this. And then then you're standing there and this is giant building size billboard. And, it's like, this is pretty neat.
Yeah. Well,
and listen, I didn't get an invite to be on your podcast until that happened. So it shows you.
Oh, it's a direct correlation. Yeah. No Times Square billboard, no deal. Was any remark made, and this is not to encourage you to make this remark by any means, but like, did you beat your wife to Broadway in this sense? Like, has she been on Broadway? I thought you didn't play that card yet. You want to say that?
You stopped there. I was like, Jesus. No,
please definitely.
What kind of question is this?
That's not what this podcast is.
I beat my wife to Broadway. She had done a couple of small, like not a persistent show or a consistent show, but there was a couple of like one-off events that she did, that were technically in some of those Broadway theaters. And so, she would probably answer that question, no, but I'm going to go and tell her that I beat her to Broadway, and, she might beat me for that.
I hope she beats you a little bit for it, but I also think it's one of those things that, once in a while, it's good to celebrate those victories with lording things like that.
It is, yeah. And if you want to talk about a brutal industry, man, acting and theater, like, holy cow. We complain about finance, about getting shoved out of our like MD position, but you do that discipline, for years and years and years and years, and you have no idea if you're going to make it. It's very political. It's not always about who's the most talented. It's sort of like, what do you look like on this day? And I guess as a musician, you probably, know this. And, I've seen a lot of her friends, like one or two of them are still chasing that dream and they get close, they're kind of there. It's like really close for them, but most of them, try for a long time and get burned out on it. And so, it's like the confidence you have to have and like the stamina you have to go through that is really pretty wild.
I was trying to explain it to people. Like, you think of people chasing into being professional athletes and stuff. And it's like, you're going to be the 1% of the 1% of the 1% or whatever to be that NBA center who's the right height, or, you and I hovering around the 6 foot mark going like, Allen Iverson means I have a chance. Like, we don't have a chance. That's not, like, it's all these things. And it's like, at least in sports, you have like a track record and you have percentages and things you can point at.
Yeah.
You want to be on Broadway, you're like, oh, I got,
And there's an expiration date as an athlete too. You're like, all right, 24, 25, like it's a wrap. Like, it's not happening for me. But in theater, it's like, well, I'm 40, but okay, there needs to be.
I can't get this role, but I could get that role.
Right. Right.
That's it's brutal. So you guys can relate on the brutality of these things. I got some notes. Let's talk about a couple of these things you said, because we had some great stuff along this line here. I love that both the business partner and your wife both come from New York City, and it sounds like you had no intention of being in New York City.
I didn't. I don't really like cities all that much, honestly. And my wife is there because she's from Los Angeles area, and she was going to the Broadway Academy, and we met on the street, and so that's kind of interesting. And then my business partner Matt and I met playing pickup basketball, which is funny because he's like 5'7". Wow. So I have to rib him. And we hit it off because he was working for a biotech fund in the city, and I was a broker, and just natural connection from that respect. And best men at each other's wedding. And his job with the genetics firm ends, and he had a pretty senior job for someone who's of his age, and he's just trying to like figure out what to do. And I had just launched this business. He's very good on the operational side, and so I'm horrible on the operational side. And so we're like, oh, let's just try this out for a few months, and you can help me out, and we'll see kind of what happens. And so he actually came in pretty early on, like 6 months to a year after SpotGamma started. So he's been with me, longer than without. And so so it's just kind of interesting how that stuff more or less lines up. And the nice thing about that is like, you just have implicit trust with somebody that I think you started to start a business. And it was fascinating this last week because you're reminded of how quickly asset prices drop, right? And people's net worth can decline, and they can go from like this very strong position to, possibly like a desperate position. You see some of that creep up, like my 401k is down 50%. What am I supposed to do? All that kind of stuff. And then, if you don't have like, trust or like a good relationship with a business person, then they start to get into trouble, and then they do crazy things. And that takes me back to the guy who, got in all sorts of trouble, the portfolio manager that I work with. So, and for the record, he's like a totally great financial stable space. It's an issue, but I was just thinking about that because, you could see how quickly a lot of this can go up in smoke, and you start to get, you have to really value the relationships that you have in those instances.
Yeah. It changes that diagram or that circle of trust around you and how you trust that in a crazy way. And I think it's telling where those people came into your life along that journey, and like how the other stuff ratcheted up in those decisions you made through those jobs, through the career arc.
Yeah. And I think too, the other thing you learn is you got to like ask a lot of the uncomfortable questions to people. And so it makes it easier when you're very just naturally close. Some of the conversations are easier because you're very close. But in trying to be polite, maybe with some other business associates may not ask about, how's this really going over there, or whatever. And you got to ask those questions. I think people don't ask those questions, uncomfortable questions a lot. And, certainly that would have saved a lot of headaches, dealing with, particularly the hedge fund debacle.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'll hate myself if I skip this note, but I did write in the margin here that your mom is the Too Short of Best in Show. That's a direct reference to all those phone calls. Jason Buck will laugh at that, if nothing else.
Yeah, the woman in Best in Show too. She plays the yuppie. She's actually in White Lotus. We were just talking about that. So.
Oh yeah. Oh,
I forget her name.
what's her name? She's phenomenal.
She does an amazing acting job in that.
Incredible comedic actress. The idea of college and just like nobody calling the internet an opportunity. What's funny is, and did you ever like Neil Postman see on your radar at all? You're
No.
familiar with like, all right, well, I'll send you some Neil Postman stuff afterwards. It's weird. Social media, the internet, a lot of this stuff shows up in some cultural criticisms, like away from finance. But I've wondered this a lot. Like, I feel like same in my school, what I went through in college, like this internet as an opportunity thing, it was more framed as like a weird risk to maybe like narrowing some margins or making stuff annoying.
Right.
But nobody was ever like, let's get super excited about what this means.
That's very, very true. Yeah.
So that haunts you too. Like that genuine, because that really haunts me. And I think about this whole AI thing. That's one of the biggest hauntings I have is the aftershock of living through the internet changing everything.
Yeah. I hadn't actually thought about that from the internet perspective, that there is a lot of fear maybe in ignoring that potential development, I guess. It's like, we're not going to talk about the internet because like it's a threat to, and maybe there's a lot of that AI stuff too now where it's like, you're not going to learn a lot about it in school because people are worried like maybe you don't need college in a couple of years because you get all the education you need, or I don't know. But it's just as an example, like, rather than embracing the technology, you see it as a threat. So you kind of like, or I'm sure there's a lot of things in life that people just don't embrace because they're more scared as opposed to saying this is like an opportunity.
Yeah. Playing defense instead of offense.
That's probably why most people want to sell options as opposed to buy them, I guess.
Well, there you go. There's a good business in those bandwidth problems as we've been learning. This idea of the merger creating basically this like job vacuum inside of the company. I think that's really interesting too, especially now that, people are getting layoffs here and all sorts of stuff. We're talking April of 2025 here. Like, the job market's wacky. People are going through this stuff. How did you think about navigating that vacuum, that this merger is happening? Your old role isn't really going to exist in the same way. And you actually, one of the points you made, you said, you asked yourself, what's the more interesting frontier? And man, how did you learn to ask that question? That's really cool.
I think you know what you know. I'd spent a lot of time with computers and I just kind of like knew that space, like what I went to school for, all that kind of stuff. And I think what I've felt is that I don't get enough exposure. I wasn't exposed to enough diversity of just sort of like different jobs and cultures and people and all those kinds of things. Like, I grew up kind of like in this very like homogenic kind of like, white people in the woods, kind of like, this is the way small town America, USA kind of thing. And like, you just don't know all the stuff you don't know. And so it's like, I think that, you get in that position and you're like, hey, do you want to be like a junior trader? It's not like someone saying like, do you want to try the janitorial role? Like, oh, okay. Like, that seems like a pretty cool, step up. So I think that you're probably maybe giving me a little bit more credit than I deserve in that space, just because it's like, it's really cool. And it was like, I can stay in this technology role and program whatever, or look at the servers and all those kinds of things, and I'll be great. Like, that's what I went to school for, like, no problem. So, but it didn't feel like a real risk to me, like trying to take that trading job, I guess, even though it was like in New York City. And I don't know, maybe the idea of like jumping around and kind of like changing things up so much, a lot of people are not as comfortable with as me. I feel like that's not true, but maybe it is true. But again, it was like, at best it was a sideways to possibly even, being just a lot more upside in that opportunity. And so, especially at 23, it's like, what do you have to lose,
23, there's a little bit different of an optionality. I love the story about that, the Christmas party at Credit Suisse. I know it's a painful and awful.
I think it's funny now,
but it's pretty.
Yeah.
It's really pretty funny.
It's really, it's hilarious. And it's like, trading places almost, like, kind of in a way. And, you learn a lot about, like, the banks are like an entity, and it's like, we're going to save the entity kind of at all costs. And then a lot of ways that makes total sense. But there's just like this kind of like deafness, or, tone deafness, in a lot of these ways. And I think that some of that comes from just like a lot of the people that are the MDs at the banks, come from wealthy families, and that's the whole, like, this is how you get into Harvard, because you get the private schools and you get all these other things. And like, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just like, you don't really, not that I was ever like this impoverished individual. It's just sort of like, that was just kind of like normal from them. It's like just the way you like operate.
That's the water in which we swim. Like, you just learn that it's there.
That's right.
The way the system
That's right.
functions.
And
Yeah.
oh man, the water with the swims reminded me of the Chris Cole paper, and that has nothing to do with this.
Okay. Chris Cole changed all of our minds at some
He
point.
changed all of our minds, and he was just talking about like, liquidity and the fish going like, what is water or whatever, and that whole the famous thing about the pump. So it just made me think of that.
Yeah. It's all good.
Yes.
We avoided Rodman, so
Yeah.
we're good at that fun. And actually, I'll make it even worse, because the note that I wrote down about this, and it ties directly into the Credit Suisse experience, and then the bank not wanting the strategy. The Saturday Night Live sketch, I think it was the laid back neutral MCs with Tim Meadows and Tracy Morgan. Does this ring a bell at all to you?
A little
So,
bit. Yeah.
It's basically the two of them, and there's like Mobb Deep beats playing in the background, but they're the laid back neutral MCs. So like the chorus to the song is "Let's take a lesson from the Swiss," and so it's this like really aggressive feeling thing at first that backs off, where you want to be really laid back and neutral about everything.
That's so funny.
And it feels like bank risk appetite a lot of the times.
Yeah, and to the point about the entity must survive, there are, these times where they have to de-risk for one reason or another, and you're just going to be the fodder for that. Like, it's just this sort of like callous decision, and, but that's what's best for like the bank, the corporation as a person sort of thing. And again, I'm not here to say that it's wrong. Like,
The system kind of needs some of that.
the system
So
needs
there's-
that, right? Like, you don't want to just have you don't want to have the like, there's this like uncapped risk because you feel bad about like, cutting certain things. But, I think there's like, you get into these times where you, like, there's no shades of gray. Like, it's either, this is how it works, it's black and white. And a lot of times I think you can have these businesses or ideas or these strategies that work really well, when everything is fine. But then when you get to these moments where, it comes to a binary decision, if you don't play that forward in your mind, what happens if this, then that, right? Like, it's not always going to be this kind of like warm shade of gray, like relaxing. Like, to give you an example, I was just reading about Ben's experience in 2007, where he pulled his fund from Bear Stearns. He's like, his recent note, Epsilon, and he's like, I loved Bear Stearns, and I had to move out of this because, like, it suddenly became this binary decision. Like, they're going to go down, and do I want my money here? Like, no. And so, he pulled his money out, and I think a lot of people would have just sat in like the, shade of gray malaise or whatever, and not played forward the same decision tree that he had. Like, eventually, like, this is going to split into where I'm forced to make a decision. Either I leave or I blow up. So,
Yeah.
And I think, like, to the point of foresight, a lot of times people wait around for that decision. Like, should the bank have never allowed us to have on that much risk, and their risk model just didn't work that well, and or maybe they knew, and like, these guys only have like a couple $1,000,000, who cares? And I guess that's the takeaway from this whole thing, is a lack of foresight all around.
Yeah. And I think it was Wall Street's Not So Golden Rule. I think that's Ben Hunt's piece. So people look that up. Brent, I mean, this is so great. I'm so happy to get this backstory, because you filled in so many gaps.
I'm glad.
I don't think
it was
dog
interesting.
shows were the secret. That's not the skeleton key. It definitely contributes. If people want to find out more, if they want to follow you, where can they find you on, Twitter, on the internet? Sign up for SpotGamma. Give them the details.
Thank you for that. At SpotGamma on X/Twitter, SpotGamma.com is the kind of website that we run there. And and then of course I do the monthly podcast with Jack and Excess Returns, which thanks to him, we're getting some new viewers over there. So that's been really exciting for us.
Yeah, and a really exceptional update. I look forward to that each and every month, just to kind of get the update on what's just happened and what we're teed up for next. So you've passed the official test with those, of where I get texts from like my brother-in-law and stuff, and people like tuning in, which is better than the cocktail party I just bought Apple because I was standing at a urinal. But high praise, man.
Thank you very much.
Brent, you are truly an intentional investor. Make sure you like, subscribe, comment, all the things below. We'll see you real soon.
Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe wherever you're watching The Intentional Investor so more people can find our show. You can follow Matt directly at cultishcreative.com or at cultishcreative on Twitter. For more great content at the intersection of investing and life, check out epsilontheory.com or at epsilontheory on Twitter.